And what I'm going to do is go to the Senior Statesman of Wolves. I remember hitchhiking from Lamar back to Mammoth one day. Norm picks me up, and we drove along that day, and we debated wolf stuff all the way back to Mammoth. And that was I knew of him before then. That was my really first time to get a feeling for Norm. And Norm is just one incredible person. And Linda,
Oh yeah, right.
Norm, I'll let him pass it up.
Pass it forward. Okay.
I'll let Norm describe it more, but I would say Norm was the interface between the Park Service and everybody else in Wolves, whether you were pro or con. And we would like to present Norm tonight with a autographed book from folks that are here, and please feel free to do some more autographing when it's done. And this is to Alpha Male 755. This is one of the commercial or commemorative volumes that we produced out of the Wolf Chart stuff, which is on Ancestry.com. And so Norm, it's a great pleasure I give you that, and I would like you to come on up, and the floor is now yours.
This is a distinguished group of folks here, and it takes me back a while. I arrived in the park in 1980, and that happened to be the same year that the first Northern Rocky Mountain Wolf Recovery Plan was completed. And I was the resource management specialist. I was in this mailroom one morning with the superintendent, John Townsley, who was very astute about the members of Congress from the 3 surrounding states. And something reminded both of us at that same moment about wolves. And I started to say something to John about wolves, and he said, not a word about wolves until we get grizzly bears on a sound footing in Yellowstone. He knew the members of Congress that well. So, jump forward a few years. John died in '82, was replaced by Bob Barbie in 1983, whom I'd known since '53, and he began to, recognize that wolf recovery was something we might want to do. Meanwhile, back in 1971, the Assistant Secretary for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, Nat Reed, one of my heroes, lifetime heroes, had pulled together a group in Yellowstone to discuss whether we should have wolves in Yellowstone. Well, maybe so, but what if we already have some? So they sent John Weaver out, and he studied for a couple of years, about 1,200 days on, or 12 months of field time, and there were no wolves. He used many methods and found there were no wolves, and recommended that they be reintroduced. So in about '83, he began to teach wolf courses out at the Institute. Guess who was in one of his classes? One of his first classes, second class, third class, along with Hank Fisher, the writer of that book that Jim's told you about. And in '84, Hank Fisher got hold of me on the phone, and he said, Norm, how would you like to have the Science Museum of Minnesota's Wolves and Humans exhibit in Yellowstone? I was ecstatic. I said, of course! So he said, okay, I'll have my people talk to your people, that's the superintendent, and the upper echelons of defenders to talk about that. And they did. And we got the Wolves and Humans exhibit at Grant Village. Thank you. Grant Village in '85. And one of the distinguished visitors to that was Ronald Reagan's golfing buddy and former chief of national parks in California, Bill Mott, another of my heroes. Bill Mott, who invented this little tag that you can not quite see up here. It says, bring back the wolf, the eyes have it. And if the battery hadn't died 20 years ago, blink the eyes. Well, so Mott was another hero. Then along came Wayne Owen, and then not long after that, one of the members of Congress realized that the momentum was getting moving for getting wolves back, and he convinced other members of the Senate that they better cut a deal. They better get the job done their way. And so James McClure of Idaho really kicked loose his other members of Congress, and all of a sudden it became the intent of Congress to restore wolves to Yellowstone. And Nathan Barley's dad was sitting in the room when a staff member, congressional staff member, brought that announcement in, and he and Hank Fisher just looked at each other aghast. They couldn't believe what they were hearing, that it was moving. I told my companion on the way up here a little while ago that I considered that the chances of getting wolves back in Yellowstone was not like pulling a camel through the eye of a needle. It was pulling 9 camels through the eye of 9 needles. There were so many barriers, so many times that the Farm Bureau and all these people that Jim mentioned up here, even Audubon Society, didn't want it done unless it was done their way. Oh my, but sure enough we got it done. Well, so, if this is my last minute, I'll try to use it productively. January 12th, 1995 was a very busy day for me. And I was so involved with, being sure my gaiters were on and that I was cool enough. I had to take my hat off, and even though it was against uniform regulations not to be without a hat. So anyway, and I shared a cup of oolong tea with the director of the National Fish and Wildlife Service, Molly Beatty, which was a treat, and details like that. And so the significance of that day, the historical wham of it, didn't really come to me that day. But a couple of weeks later, I was giving a talk to a group about a third this size from a school class over in the canteen in the park. And I had been carefully, excruciatingly carefully taught when I was giving my 400 or so talks to the public from about 1985 through 97 or 95, to very carefully preface anything I said with, if wolves are restored to Yellowstone, then this group of scientists, 6 dozen of them, gave us their opinion that this would happen. So it was always then, if this happens, then we expect. And I started through my script, and I hit the first if word. I couldn't continue. It took me about a half a minute to regain my composure, because they were there. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was done. We had them. They were on the ground. So anyway, now for the future, for those youngsters out there, youngsters around here in Colorado, there is an initiative 107 that's going to be on the ballot, partly because of my efforts and the efforts of a lot of other people, about 50-odd people in Colorado, who are putting together and are working to make the same case for wolves in Colorado, my home state, as we had to make here in Yellowstone. And I keep sending them stuff all about Yellowstone that gives them a girding for the arguments they're offering in Colorado to bring wolves back to Colorado. So I started in 1980, and hopefully I'll be going to another few years. Oh, I just got a pacemaker replaced. And so I've got another, the doc said I've had another 10 to 12 years.
While I was madly looking out here trying to see if there's anybody else I should get, pretty quietly sat over here and didn't remind me. I'll give you a 2-minute slot here too, Rick.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for inviting us to your compound here. I was around wolves a lot before Yellowstone for 15 years in Alaska, Denali, and then some in Glacier. When I was in Glacier in the early 90s, I was asked to write a wolf book. So I would come down to Yellowstone prior to the reintroduction, and I'd interview people like Nathan's dad, John Varley, all the scientists that were down here, interviewed Norm, would go up to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service office in Helena, interview Ed Bangs, and was hired to be the wolf interpreter here starting in the spring of 1994 in the interpretation division. I think at that time I may have been the only ranger actually in the park that had been around wild wolves a lot. That was before the biologist came. And so my job was to, like Norm, talk about the reintroduction. It wasn't if anymore, it was here's how we're going to do it. In the winters I was working in the desert in Big Bend, so I came back in '95 just a few weeks after the wolves were released. We didn't really think that they would be very visible, but my first day here I got to see all 6 of the Crystal Creek wolves. And so my job was to work with the public, so I just naturally helped them to see wolves, look through my scope. And I remember I had helped a lot of people, I kind of lost track of it. And I looked over this way, and this woman was running at me with her arms extended. It looked like she had just won the World Wrestling Championship. And I started to move out of the way. But her intent was to give me a hug and thank me for bringing the wolves back. And so that was kind of the beginning of it. And so since then, I think as of today, I've been out in the field with the wolves, not that it counts, for 8,148 days. That's about 90%. And that's about 90% of the time that the wolves have been here. But more important than that is, like many of the folks in the audience here, especially people like Lori Lyman, just being able to help so many people see the wolves over the years is just such a great privilege. And we've had Make-A-Wish kids come out. Their wish was to see wolves. We've helped them. We've had older people. They're dying. Their last wish is to see wolves. We've had people in wheelchairs that we've pushed up the hill. We've helped them see wolves. Just, every possible person you can imagine. So it's been quite a ride for 25 years, and we'll see what happens the next 25 years. Thank you.
I just have to thank John Farley, Nathan's dad. Without John, no wolves. Without John, no wolves. He had the imagination, the energy, the intellectual capacity to bring it off. And I just had to say that.
Missing anybody? Missing anybody?